Mr. President, this has been a simple bill that it's been out for quite a while now. It came from one personal story that I would share, but it was from many personal stories that I've heard over the years from those who find themselves in a position that they're hard workers, they want to work, but they aren't able to make a salary that will allow them to provide a quality living style for their families. One is a constituent that I have from the city of Hopewell, and her name is Vet Hodge, and she says, I have been a home care provider for 20 years. Home care providers like me help people with disabilities and older adults live at home and stay out of institutions. By doing that, we also help save the state money. Over 20 years, I've cared for people with disabilities, people with dementia and Alzheimer's and the elderly. I help them with bathing, cooking, getting prescription medicines, grocery shopping, and many more things I do for them to help them with everything they need. With my help, they have been able to stay in their own homes where they can feel comfortable and secure and where they can see their family more easily. I have loved being a home care provider because I love giving my clients quality one-on-one care. Home care is more than just a job. I became a part of their lives and their families. I learned so much from my clients. I learned how to garden from one client, and I learned about family from another. I love doing home care as much as my clients love being home. However, home care providers like me face serious challenges. The biggest challenge is that the pay is way too little. I wasn't able to take care of even the basic needs of my family. I couldn't pay the rent, pay for my car, put food on the table. I'll stop right there because it's more. But I will tell you, Mr. President, it's been 10 years since Virginia workers received an increase in wages. Meanwhile, the price of everyday goods continues to go up. In 2009, the average price for a gallon of gas in America was $1.78. Today, it's $2.41. In 2009, the average home price in Virginia was $233,000. Today, it is $255,000. This simple bill allows us to start the progression of $10 July 1, 2019, $13 July 1, 2021, at 2020. Sorry, Mr. President, and $15 July 1, 2021. I ask that this bill pass.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Mr. President, I rise to speak in opposition to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I salute the gentlelady for her motivation in bringing this bill. We all want higher wages for Virginians, and I believe that that is a laudable goal. It's something that we work for every day in this body, improving the business environment, trying to make sure that businesses have conditions that are conducive to expansion and growth. And in fact, in Commonwealth of Virginia and across America, over the course of the past year or two, we have seen an increase in the wages that are being paid to workers across Virginia and across the country. And this has taken place even without raising the minimum wage. And my concern is rooted in a number of issues. First of all, this bill more than doubles the minimum wage in Virginia. That's a big problem. It's a big step. It's a big jump. Now, in a former life, I was an economist, and I understand that you can't suspend. No matter how many powers we have as members of the legislature, we can't suspend and we can't override the laws of economics. And the laws of economics are pretty simple in terms of supply and demand. When the price goes up, the demand goes down. And that goes for jobs and pay as well. When the salary you have to pay to employees goes up, businesses are going to employ fewer of those people. Now, there are an awful lot of people for whom I really want to make sure that their wages continue to go up. But the problem with this is that a lot of jobs are going to disappear. It's not just that people are not going to see increasing wages. It's going to see their jobs go away. And that has been the experience across the country with this movement to dramatically increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour and wages in that range. It eliminates jobs. In a lot of ways, it hurts the very people that this kind of legislation is intended to benefit. There are a lot of people who are entering the workforce who need the experience and the skills that come with a first-time job. Kids who are in high school, kids who've just finished high school, people who don't have experience getting up and going to work and understanding the demands of the workplace. And these minimum wage jobs serve an important purpose. And if we raise the minimum wage in the manner that's described in this bill, what's going to happen is those jobs and those opportunities and those learning experiences are going to disappear, and we're not going to be able to provide that to the kids who are graduating from high school, people entering the workforce, and we're going to hurt an awful lot of businesses that depend on providing those opportunities to those who are just entering the workforce. So despite the good intentions of my friend from Petersburg, I admire what she is trying to do. I'm all in favor of raising wages in Virginia, and I believe we've gone a long way in that direction. We've got a long way to go, but this, ladies and gentlemen, is not the way to do it. It's going to hurt working Virginians. It's going to hurt people entering the workforce, and it's going to hurt businesses. So I would urge my colleagues to vote no.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw, rise?
We just heard a rather nice speech from the senator from Shenandoah, Rockingham. But unfortunately, it doesn't square with the facts. What he's described has not happened anywhere, and in fact, there just was a recent study. Arizona raised theirs is up by 2020. Actually, it rises to $12.50, and it's slightly lower than that now. And they just completed a study, and it had no impact at all as far as costing jobs. And quite frankly, 29 states plus the District of Columbia have a higher minimum wage than Virginia. Even Arkansas and several others, I think southern or southeastern, southwestern states. You know, it's if we went by the rise in the cost of living since the 1970s, early 70s, it would be over $15 an hour now. At $7.25, quite frankly, if your business plan says that you can't pay more than $7.25 an hour, you're really not long for this world. And I got to be honest with you, I wouldn't hire anybody who would work for $7.25 an hour. So we're not, you know, you're not going to cost people jobs. And, you know, what happens is, and don't think we're not paying for this by keeping it at $7.25 an hour. These people, a lot of them wind up are on public assistance. And guess what? I would guess that when you added up the benefits the states are giving them, it's above $7.25 an hour. So essentially, we're being penny wise and pound foolish by not raising the minimum wage here in Virginia. I haven't had anybody from Northern Virginia tell me, any of the business community, that, hey, we shouldn't be raising the minimum wage. Quite frankly, like I said, it's absurd. And by the way, also, if your business plan shows that you can't pay more than $7.25 an hour, let me tell you one other thing. You're not the next Warren Buffett.
Senator, for what purpose does Junior Senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to share another story from Laura Lynn Clark in Henrico County. She is also a home care provider who earns less than minimum wage, although she works full time. For 25 years, I worked as a home care provider for a woman with disabilities. This woman was more than a client for me. She truly became part of our family, and I was able to help her live the happiest, healthiest life possible. During those 25 years, however, I never made more than $9 an hour, despite my hard work, my experience, and my skill. The cost of everything continued to go up and up, but my pay stayed mostly the same. And it's not just home care workers, child care providers, food service workers, truck drivers. We are all struggling to make a living, and it's getting harder and harder for all of Virginia's working families. My husband had to work 2 to 3 jobs to supplement our income. When my client passed away, I was heartbroken, and I was broke. After 25 years as a home care provider, I had no savings. Every dollar I earned was stretched to barely cover rent, bills, and food. I don't know what to do. I don't know that I can ever retire. It may be too late for me, but it's not too late for others. Mr. President, a few years ago, I took the minimum wage or the living wage challenge. In this challenge, you try to live a week on what it would take, what you would bring in if you made $7.25 per hour. The generic calculation estimates that these earners, after their housing bills, have $77 for the week for food, gas, emergencies, and everything else they have to pay for. Mr. President, I ran out of money on the second day. The Pew Research indicated that in 2013, the real purchasing power of $7.25 was about where it was in the early 1980s and below its peak in the 1960s. But the price of everything else has gone up quite a bit. And folks are struggling just to put food on the table, choosing between medication, food, clothing, shelter. Even though they work every day, some doing very difficult work caring for our loved ones who cannot take care of themselves. It's time we look out for them. There were amendments that would have made this bill a little bit easier for some on the other side of the aisle, but they weren't accepted. But $7.25 an hour is just not a living wage. It's time we increase it. It's time we do it now. And that's why I ask you to support the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, the senator from Hampton, Senator Locke, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak in support of Senate Bill 1200.
The senator has the floor.
Mr. President, we all want the opportunity to thrive, no exceptions. But when corporations and special interests conspire to keep wages low, families can't get ahead. We know that every job should be a good job and hard work should pay. It's long past time to raise the wage so that everyone who works hard can live with dignity. Everyone should have the opportunity to succeed and have a stable future with financial security and independence. People who work hard and play by the rules should be able to afford to live with dignity and raise a family. Raising the wage is a shot in the arm for our economy, giving working families more money to spend, which in turn gives our community, businesses more customers. Raising the wage to $15 would help close the wage gap and give a boost to families struggling to help their kids get ahead, lifting them out of poverty. People who work hard and play by the rules should be able to afford to live with dignity and raise a family. This is America, where growth comes from the middle out, not the top down. People want to be working hard and earning a decent wage that can support a family. Too many working Virginians are losing ground and not getting a fair shot at the American dream. We need to create an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. No one is guaranteed success in America, but everyone deserves a fair shot to succeed and make enough to pay their bills. Our Commonwealth needs new policies that provide everyone an opportunity to get ahead, and a minimum wage ensures every family can make ends meet. I implore those who do not support this legislation to try living on $7.25 an hour themselves. I, too, took the living wage challenge. I ran out the first day. So Senate Bill 1200 is a start in the right direction for giving citizens a chance toward a livable wage. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Surville, rise?
Speaking to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to tell a very quick story and make 2 points, and then I'll sit down. Every once in a while I'll take on a case because I'm interested in helping somebody out. I had a client that came to me a few years ago who had a child custody problem. He lived on Route 1 near my house, and he lived in the apartments down the hill, and he was trying to get custody of his child. And I was talking to him about his child support and trying to figure out what his child support obligation would be, and talking about where he worked. And I said, "Where'd you work?" He said, "Well, I work at Chipotle." And he lived about 2 blocks from the Chipotle up the hill, right next door to where I used to work, Bob's Big Boy, when I was in high school, where I made $1.79 an hour plus tips in 1987. And I said, "You work at that Chipotle right there at Beacon Hill?" He said, "No, I don't work there." And I said, "What Chipotle do you work at?" He said, "I work at the Chipotle in Union Station in D.C. I said, "Why do you commute from Route 1 to Washington, D.C.? He said, "Well, they pay me $13 an hour at the D.C. Chipotle. The Chipotle in Beacon Hill only pays $10 an hour." So we have people in Northern Virginia that are commuting, leaving Northern Virginia to work in D.C. because D.C. has minimum wage that's higher in Virginia. And they're riding the metro, they're driving on the, actually he's probably not riding the metro, he's probably driving in his car or riding a bus. But we have people that are commuting out of state to work because of our wage. The second thing I want to dispel the idea that this is somehow bad for business. You know, we talk about our CNBC ratings all the time. And Virginia moved up, I guess, to number 4 this year. We were number 1 for a while. We went down to 7, I think. Now we're back at 4. So number 1 is Texas. Number 2 is Washington. Number 3 is Utah. We're number 4. Colorado and Minnesota are 5 and 6. State of Washington, minimum wage is $12 an hour. And they're 2 spots ahead of us. They're scheduled to rise to $13.50 by 2020. State of Colorado, 1 click below us. They're at $11.10. They go up to $12.20 as of January 1st, 2020. Minnesota is at $9.86 right now. They're $2 an hour higher than we are. They're only 2 clicks below us. Colorado and Minnesota were higher than us, actually, for the last 2 or 3 years. But the idea that minimum wage is going to somehow destroy our business competitiveness ratings, to me, is nonsense. There are states that are $5 an hour higher than us right now that are ranked 2 spots higher than us. And the last thing I just want to say is that anybody, a minimum wage basically equates to $15,080 per year for somebody that's doing 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. And nobody can live on $15,000 a year. And if somebody's getting paid $15,000 a year, it's a pretty good chance they're getting benefits from this state, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's temporary aid for needy families, whether it's other things. And by keeping our minimum wage down, what we're doing is basically subsidizing large corporations because taxpayers are making up the ability for these folks to be able to live. And by raising minimum wage, I think it'll actually have a positive impact on our state budget, not only in income taxes, but in terms of the services that the taxpayers are required to pay for. And at the end of the day, from my point of view, if we invest in people, they're going to invest back in our communities, and it's going to help everybody because a rising tide lifts all ships. And that's exactly what this does, and that's why we should vote for it.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Prince William County, Senator McPike, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak to the measure.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, raising the minimum wage would impact roughly 1.3 Virginians, many of whom are women and minorities who work every day to make ends meet. Now, there's a misconception that the majority of workers who earn less than $15 an hour are teenagers working a part-time job. And in fact, many of these workers are adults working full-time, trying to earn enough to support their family and their futures. And without the opportunity to earn a living wage, these workers have to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. And that means time away from their kids. That means time away from the opportunity to read to them at night, to teach their kids something new, to spend just a few moments because they are working multiple jobs. This has a huge impact to Virginia's families. By raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the Commonwealth would have more money to spend and boost our local economies. Furthermore, our state expenditures on assistance program would decrease dramatically. In fact, a study from a few years ago showed that raising the wage to just $10.10 would result in a decrease in SNAP enrollees by over 100,000 and reduce Virginia SNAP expenditures by more than $105 million a year. Here in Virginia, as many of you recall, we had over 3,800 state employees who were paid so little that they were below the federal poverty line. Over 220 of these employees were earning so little that they were receiving federal assistance. That's pretty shameful. These are things we can do better. Virginians look to us for guidance on these things. Americans have been earning a minimum wage that requires them to live below the poverty level for decades. It is time that we end that, and I hope today you'll join me in supporting an increase in the minimum wage to these hardworking Virginians to provide for their families and to decrease the cost of assistance programs to taxpayers and to boost our economy. But more than that, when you work out the math, folks, it's about someone going to work, earning a day's wage for a day's pay, and just earning a little over $100. When you work through the math, not a lot of money. Not a lot of money at all, folks. Just over $31,000 a year for your labor and services throughout the year. And I appreciate your support for the measure. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator. For what purpose is Senator from James City County, Senator Norman, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in opposition of the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would say that there seems to be a reoccurring inaccurate premise that is coming from some of my colleagues. And I would say that a strict empirical business analysis is not an expression of a lack of empathy or sensitivity to lower income individuals. Many times on this floor, I have heard arguments that have been presented that attempt to capsule egregious situations or some of the most heart-tugging situations to emphasize a point. After this bill came up in committee, I did something that is very uncharacteristic of me. I decided to have some research done exactly on what impact, if any, raising the minimum wage would do. One of the senators spoke about what has taken place in other states. So before we migrate to Virginia's situation, let me remind you that in the San Francisco community, that an analysis was done in late 2017 and found that for each $1 increase in the minimum mandatory raise, that there was a 14% increase in the closing of medium-income restaurants. You mentioned Washington, which has really been the poster child of some of these minimum mandatory wages at $15 an hour. One of the things that they found in Washington, that as they increased the minimum mandatory wage, that these lower income workers ended up getting less hours to work, so that business individuals could compensate for what the increased cost would be on their customers. But that's all out there on the left coast. Let me try to share a few Virginia factoids with you. One of the things that they found under the Obama Congressional Budget Office was that even at a $9 minimum wage, it would cost about 100,000 jobs, and going to $10 an hour would cost 500,000 jobs under that administration's analysis. As a matter of fact, in an updated analysis using the same methodology that the Congressional Budget Office used under the Obama administration, it found at $12 an hour, Virginia would lose 24,000 jobs. It is also interesting to see this. Nobody is talking about potentially what the impact would be on the seat of government or the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Department of Human Resource Management, which is our agency, has taken a look at it, and they have found that if we ultimately go to $15 an hour on the mandatory minimum wage, that it's going to affect almost 7,000 salaried employees and have almost a $20 million impact every year. So I would suggest to you, Mr. President, that from a business analysis and not being insensitive to lower income people, but looking at the impact to businesses, that there is some empirical, not emotional data that supports why this is a bad idea. And I'm sure that all of you are aware of the number of organizations that have come out in very fervent opposition to this, and I was particularly interested in the comments from the senator from Eastern Fairfax and the senior senator from Fairfax. My favorite group that has come out in opposition to this is the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, my buddies. So don't tell me that you're not hearing anything from Northern Virginia.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Roanoke City, Senator Edwards, rise?
Mr. President, rising in favor of this bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, the minimum wage has not gone up since 2009. And since then, one of the biggest, and even before that, biggest problems of our country and our Commonwealth is income divide. Those at the high income level are doing very well. Those at the low income level are doing not so well. In fact, because we've not had a rise in the minimum wage, those at the low income level are worse than they've been in I don't know when, many, many years, probably since the 1960s. Mr. President, in addition to that, contrary to what you've just heard, it's good for business to raise the minimum wage. Why? People who have money at the low income level, people who have additional $1 per hour or additional $2 per hour, what do they do with their money? They spend it. And when they spend it, it's good for retailers. It's good for the economy as a whole. So overall, Mr. President, the studies show throughout the country, when you raise the minimum wage, you're actually helping the economy because those at the low income level, they spend all their money. They don't save it. They spend it, and that's good for the economy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Arlington, Senator Favola, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm speaking in favor of the motion to adopt the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just think it's worth noting that Virginia has the 15th highest cost of living. That's adjusted for all the other states. So, in effect, what we're doing by not increasing the minimum wage is we're allowing this incredible disparity to grow among the haves and the have-nots in our state. And I think that's something we need to address. Although it was mentioned earlier that public assistance benefits make up the difference when industry doesn't pay workers a living wage, I bet none of us realize that it's actually 69% of non-elderly who are working at jobs that are minimum wage or slightly above, they're receiving public assistance. And those dollars are either state dollars or local dollars. Dollars to support them to pay for their housing. Many of them are getting food stamps. Their children are eligible for free and reduced lunch. We are providing that safety net when we allow industry to not pay a living wage. And we need to think about it in that context. And lastly, many of the points I was going to make have been made rather eloquently by my colleagues, but I guess there's studies and then there's studies. There's a study done by Wilson and Bellman that they looked at 37 statistical analyses of the impact of the minimum wage on different jurisdictions and found that there was not a negative impact on employment. The fact is the jobs that our lower income workers are doing need to be done. And they are a driving force in the economic engine in our communities. And we need to step up and allow them to make a living wage so we have safer, stronger, and more vibrant communities. And by the way, most of the individuals who are making minimum wage or slightly above are women, and they're heads of households. So for these and many other reasons, I really implore the Senate to pass this measure. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker, rise?
Excuse me, Mr. President. Speak to the measure.
The senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I speak in favor of this particular proposal. I would like to address a few issues that have been raised. There's been some concern about how quickly we are moving to increase the minimum wage, but yet we had an opportunity today to spread that increase over 5 years instead of 3 years, and not a single person from the other side of the aisle joined in supporting that motion. We are in a situation where, although we are one of the more affluent states in the nation, we clearly are behind the majority of states in terms of our minimum wage. As was noted by the senior senator from Fairfax, 29 of the states, as well as the District of Columbia, all have higher minimum wages, and many of them have unemployment rates that are lower or comparable to what we have in Virginia. There's no excuse for us not moving forward and providing benefits for all Virginians in terms of the strong economy that we are building here in Virginia. I would also note that in states that have, many of the states that have increased the minimum wage have done so despite the fact that they are heavily Republican in terms of their overall voting patterns. And in many instances, what has happened in those states is it's not necessarily been by the legislature, but it's been by initiative and referendum. We don't have initiative and referendum in Virginia, but those states that have initiative and referendum, a lot of them have used that process to be able to put to the voters a proposal for raising the minimum wage. And what has happened in those states is that almost without exception, and often by overwhelming majorities, the public is in support of raising the minimum wage. Those people in those states who have substantial incomes, middle income, upper middle income, and even the wealthy, have often been supportive of that because they want everyone in their state to benefit from the economy that we have and from the jobs that people have, and for the people that are working hard in those jobs to be able to support themselves and their families adequately. Finally, I would point out that last year we passed a Medicaid expansion here in Virginia. Many of the people who are coming on the rolls for Medicaid expansion, and it will come out on the rolls over the next year, would be in a position where they would not have to rely upon Medicaid. They would have income levels that would push them above the 135% of poverty that's required for the Medicaid expansion. And that would actually in many ways benefit us as a Commonwealth. And we need to take advantage of those types of things in many ways, in any way we can as well. Thank you very much.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Hanover, Senator McDougal, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. To speak against the motion.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, listen to the eloquence of my colleagues across the aisle, and there were a couple things that I was struck with. One, that we're hearing about Washington State and their propensity for business in our nation. And Mr. President, I noticed on our calendar that we're going to be taking up a bill very shortly about a major employer that's moving its operation from that state that is supposed to be so prosperous to Virginia. Mr. President, so as we have that discussion about Amazon, I want us to keep in mind the business climate, the state from which they were moving. Mr. President, it also caused me to check a publication called the Business Insider, and there was a University of Washington study done. Right after, in 2015, Seattle and Washington raised their minimum wage to $11, and the University of Washington study found that low-wage employment actually went down after that minimum wage increase. So, Mr. President, as we're talking about facts and reality, I would like us to talk about some facts and reality of business climates and impacts that we're going to see and discuss here momentarily on the floor of the Senate, and the fact and reality that raising minimum wage in a recent study did not lead to low-wage earners having more employment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Amazon starts at $15 an hour, but nevertheless, the National Bureau of Economic Research recently released the new research evaluating the impact of 130 state-level minimum wage increases from 1979 to 2016. They found overall number of low-wage jobs maintained essentially unchanged over 5 years following the increases. At the same time, the direct effect of the minimum wage on average earnings was amplified by modest wage spillovers at the bottom of the wage distribution. Our estimates by detailed demographers groups shows that the lack of job loss is not explained by labor substitutions at the bottom of the wage distribution. It also found no evidence of disemployment when considered higher levels of minimum wages. In other words, minimum wage increases boost incomes, don't lead to job losses for low-wage workers overall of any particular group, such as young workers or low-education workers. A 2018 University of California, Berkeley study of minimum wage increases in 6 large cities found that policies are working as intended. Thus far, they're raising the earning of low-wages workers without causing disruption in the labor market. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard on Senate Bill 1200? Seeing none, Senator from Petersburg, Senator Dance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have to first say thank you to my colleagues that voted for this bill in committee to allow us to bring it to the floor for a debate so that the people of Virginia could see us hard at work trying to make the decision on their behalf. Mr. President, I've heard information from both sides. I've heard the factual information. I've heard the feelings, the passion of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. But, Mr. President, I know that if we're serving this body, all of us make more than $7.25 an hour. But, Mr. President, I also know that if we are at the seasoned age that a lot of us are, that either we or members of our families or friends are going to need the services of people that make $7.25 an hour, because they take care of our most precious, valuable folks here on earth, and that's our families, our children, our parents, those who need their help. And they do this at a sacrifice of their own. These are the caregivers from all over this Commonwealth that we expect to help us in our homes and the nursing homes. And we go there and we say, how come these people are not given better care? Because it costs to get people that really care about what they're doing. And it's hard for them to care about what they're doing when they're concerned about their families at home that they cannot support on $7.25 an hour. Mr. President, it took a bipartisan decision to get this bill out of committee. It will take the same to move it out of the Senate, down the hall to the House for possible consideration. I hold no disillusions, but I'm always hopeful that there will be enough good people that realize $7.25 is not enough for people to better themselves, to become independent, instead of being dependent on services that others have to provide because they just cannot make it on $7.25. If we want to help people move from dependency to independence, it starts with us. They have sent us here to make a difference for all of them. They trust us to make decisions as best for all and not forget where we came from or what we promised when they gave us our vote. I have no disillusionments about the outcome of this. But again, Mr. President, I ask that this bill pass.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall Senate Bill 1200 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 19, noes 21.
Ayes 19, noes 21. Senate Bill 1200 fails.